Welcome to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps, a bi-weekly podcast with me, Dr. Kish Cumi Price. Hello and welcome back to Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps. I am Dr. Kish Cumi Price, and I have a very, very special guest with me today, Dr. Rick Balkin. He is one of my favorite mentors and is currently at Ole Miss. And I will allow you to introduce yourself with your title and all the things.
Sure, sure. I'm a professor at the University of Mississippi. I've been at a few universities. We met at the University of Louisville when I was a professor there. Yeah. And uh, uh, at the University of Mississippi, I'm serving as department chair for leadership and counselor education. I'm a counselor by trade. I'm a licensed professional counselor and have been so since 1993. So
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I've been doing this a while, and I've done a lot of research over the years. Formatively, I worked with adolescents in psychiatric hospitalization, so working with a lot of uh, youth in my formative clinical years, and did some adults as well, but really focused on adolescents in crisis, adolescents who were a danger to self, danger to others. And my research evolved, and I looked at counseling outcomes, and I stumbled into this area of forgiveness that was really informed by my clinical work, and also being Jewish, and so and those two things kind of worked hand in hand, and it wasn't like, oh, I want to do something Jewish, but it was a circumstance that occurred that we can talk about what led me into this area, um, and then into the book, Practicing Forgiveness, a path toward healing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listen, this is the book, guys. If you're watching, you can see that I'm holding up this gem to the camera, practicing forgiveness and a path toward healing. And I hope that you will locate the book. We'll give you some more information on that and different tools a little bit later. But I want to connect some dots here for our listeners. I know we have global listeners, and you're probably wondering, okay, this is Bullies, Wimps, and Poverty Pimps. You've been walking us on this journey. Why do you have somebody here talking about forgiveness? Well, I I hope that if you have joined us for this journey, you can understand the importance of owning forgiveness for yourself and having your own journey that you walk through. If you have experienced any of the elements that we've been speaking about, if you have experienced bullying, you've experienced wimping out, you've experienced poverty pimping, whatever that is. And if you're on the victim side or the offender side, there's still a forgiveness process attached to this work. And so I hope you listen with a really sharp ear, that you have grace for this process. But I want to start us out with just a question before I get into our discussion here, which is going to get really good, juicy, deep. It's so good. But the question that you asked at the beginning of the book, are you willing to re-examine your perspective of forgiveness?
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that we need to kind of use to guide our conversation here. Just think about that, because we all have our own preconceived notions of what forgiveness is and what that process looks like. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to write the book.
Oh wow. Okay, so why did I decide to write the book? It came from a case back when I was working with uh, adolescents and psychiatric hospitalization. And understand that when I say psychiatric hospitalization, um, we're talking about adolescents around ages 12 to 18, um, who are considered a danger to self or a danger to others. And There's maybe they're suicidal, maybe they are threatening others, maybe they're into drugs or acting out behaviors, um, and occasionally, not even occasionally, commonly, I would have kids who'd been severely abused, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and um, I was working on a case, and I called. I don't use individuals' real names, obviously, but I labeled this person in the book. I call her Sheila, and Sheila's a 16-year-old female, and Sheila was sexually abused by her father, and she discloses to her school counselor that she's being abused by her father. And the school counselor does everything a school counselor is supposed to do. The school counselor calls the abuse hotline, makes a report, an investigation ensues, and um, dad is removed from the home while the investigation is going on, and he's denying the allegations. When the dad is removed from the home, the mom looked at Sheila and said, "You're destroying our family." And at this point in time, Sheila's like, my whole world is collapsing. My mom is blaming me. My dad is denying these allegations. I just want to end it all. And that's what brings her into the hospital. And unfortunately, this is not an uncommon case. This is something I dealt with a lot over the 7 years that I worked in this environment. Um, But what was interesting about it is I went to court and I had to testify, and so there was a lot of memorable moments for working with Sheila. But one thing that happened is after we had gone to court, and I'm doing the first family session between mom and Sheila. And if you can imagine walking into this family conference room, and I met with mom first, and I looked at mom and I said, "What your daughter needs most right now is support." And mom is nodding with me, and I'm like, "Okay, we're on the same page. I can
Right.
bring Sheila in." And I bring her into the session, and there's chairs and a sofa, and usually the parent and child will sit on the sofa together, kind of reunifying. It's good. That's not what happened. Sheila goes to sit on the couch. Mom sits on the chair in between me and Sheila. And the first words out of mom's mouth is she looks at her daughter and says, "You know, as a Christian, you have to forgive him." And I would love to tell you that I paused for a moment and took a deep breath and was thoughtful about my next words, but I wasn't.
Right.
All right. Because, I mean, I'm sure in my mind, I was just like, what? You know,
Right.
um, and that's basically what came out. So mom says, "You know, as a Christian, you have to forgive him." And without missing a beat, I look at the mom and say, "Wouldn't that be convenient for you?" And mom looks at me like, "What did you just say?" And, I'm sure in the back of my mind is like, yeah, but that's not what happened. She goes, "What did you just say?" And I said, "Well, if she just forgives him, this gets all wiped under the rug, doesn't it? All gets swept under the rug." I
Mm,
said, "Wouldn't that be convenient for you?" And so this family session does not go well.
mm,
And Sheila does not get the support that she wants from her mom. And she's not going to go home, and there's not going to be this family reunification, and she's going to go live with other relatives who are going to provide a safe home for her. And it's just bad. And honestly, for Sheila, things are going to get worse before they get better. They will get better, but you know as horrible as abuse is, now whatever support system you thought you had, that's gone too. And where you went to school and your friends and all of that is about to change. And so it really is going to get worse before it gets better for Sheila. Um, And of course, the way this session went, I'm thinking to myself, as a Christian, you have to forgive him. I mean, is that even true? I don't know. I'm Jewish. Um,
Listen, and I'm Christian, and I read that and I said, no, I was just like, that was horrible.
but of course, we've all heard the adages of turn the other cheek. To forgive is divine.
Right, right.
And if you really think about it, what we learn about forgiveness, early on in age, when's the first time that we deal with forgiveness? Probably as a toddler, where we are watching a parent and a toddler, and the toddler is throwing a fit, and the parent is just trying to get the kid under control. And then the kid, just in their frustration and anger, they slap the parent on the arm. And the parent is like, oh no, you do not slap my arm. And now
Right,
the kid is just like, and the parent's like, what do you have to say? And the kid's like, I'm so sorry. And, okay. And now we're calming down.
right.
Give me a hug. There's crying and you get a hug. But
Mhm.
that's our first experiences with
Yeah,
I did wrong. I apologized. And now it's going to get better.
right,
You know, and,
right.
and we grow up with this concept and we conceptualize reconciliation as the end game for forgiveness. If I forgive, then I reconcile and things get better.
Hmm.
But there are times when we can't do that. And it just so happened that after I left the psych hospital environment and I went and I got my doctorate, and I'm in my first academic position in Texas, and I moved to McKinney, Texas, and we were attending. That's my first time attending a new synagogue in Plano, Texas, and it's Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. Now, if you don't know anything about the Jewish Day of Atonement, um, there's this period of time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's 10 days. Jews refer to it as the days of awe. And Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. And during the Jewish New Year, we don't get drunk and celebrate. We reflect. We reflect on the previous year and think about how we need to grow and change and be a better person. And then on Yom Kippur, 10 days later, we ask for forgiveness and we atone for our sins. Um, And so it's a fasting holy day. It's the holiest day of the Jewish year. And so the last thing, and services go all day. And so you go to morning services, and they have afternoon services, and then there's memorial services, and then there's concluding services. And if you're a good Jew, you stay all day and you fast. Um,
Right.
Now, if you're more of a liberal Jew, you can go home in between services and stare at the refrigerator and lament on the fact that you can't eat right now. I didn't want to do that. And it just so happened there was a study group in between the morning service and the afternoon service. Like, I'm going to stay for the study group. I don't want to go home and stare at the fridge. So, and in the study group, this is like 2003, I get introduced to the Jewish conceptualization of forgiveness. And this article written by Rabbi David Blumenthal. And he talks about three types of forgiveness in Judaism. He talks about, he uses Hebrew words. He says kapara, and kapara is spiritual forgiveness, the forgiveness that only God can give. Like during the Spanish Inquisition, Jews were either told to convert or die. All right. So many Jews converted, but then continued to practice Judaism in secret. And they say this blessing called Kol Nidre, which translates to all vows, and you're asking God for forgiveness for the vows you have broken. Okay, pretty beautiful thing. And then you have restitutional forgiveness, what is termed as silicha. And silicha is I borrowed your lawnmower. I broke your lawnmower. I repaired your lawnmower. We're good. All right. You know, something bad happened, but I made it right. But then we get asked the question, what happens when you can't make restitution? I didn't I didn't break your lawnmower. I totaled your car and I can't repair and I can't get you a new car. And it's going to cost you money and your insurance rates are going to rise and there's nothing I can do about it. Oh, that's bad. Well, what about when it's slander
Yeah.
or abuse or neglect? Things that once they happen, you can't undo. And so we have this Hebrew word called mechila, and it literally translates to wipe away debt. And when you think about what happens when you wipe away debt, when I say to you, what I want from you, I'm not going to get, so you don't owe it to me anymore. We're done. Now, from that, I can say, and we can try to repair our relationship, or I can say, no, we're done. I don't hold any ill will towards you. I'm not angry with you. I'm done. And
Now,
I was like,
let me ask you a quick question there,
yeah,
because that was one of my lingering questions from reading the book and just understanding. I think you did a really great job of juxtaposing, emotional forgiveness with directional or decisional forgiveness, and then interpersonal forgiveness and intrapersonal forgiveness. And my question, in the process of wiping away that debt
right.
and doing the work of wiping away that debt,
Doing the work. Right.
that's the question. What does that typically look like in your,
Yeah.
in your estimation of how this works? How do you get to that point
Yeah.
of wiping away the debt?
Right. Okay. So let's first talk about is why we get to that point.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've been harmed by somebody. I'm hurt. I'm
Yeah.
angry. And, you know, do I want to reconcile with this person? Look, as counselors, we deal with this all the time. We have successful couples counseling. All right. We've dealt with couples who have experienced horrible things, infidelity. And you know what? We often see strong couples who are like, wow, they've been married 50, 60 years. Those are strong, beautiful couples. They never had any serious problems. But we also see couples who are like, you know what? You've struggled, you've had issues, and you've put it back together. And you know what? Those are strong couples too. You know,
Yes.
those are beautiful stories too when people overcome obstacles and put it back together. And that doesn't mean that that's the only outcome or that's even the healthy outcome.
Right.
It is one outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that that happens, and we can say, you know what? It would be good if we could repair this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There is remorse, there is change. We can grow from this, and we can renegotiate our relationship.
Yes.
But sometimes, either A, we want to reconcile the relationship, but the other person hasn't changed. There's no remorse. They
Mm-hmm.
are who they are, and it's like, you know what? This isn't going to happen.
Right.
Or from the get go, we go, oh no, there is no benefit to continuing with this relationship. And either way, you end up at this point of
Yeah.
recognizing that what I wanted from this person, trust, affection,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, I'm not going to get. Now I can continue to hold you accountable for that. And I'm going to be angry for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when you realize that what you want from someone, you're not going to get it, and you no longer expect it from them?
Hmm.
All right. You know, when you go and you eat at a restaurant, you expect you expect a certain amount of surface acting. You expect that the person who is attending to you at the restaurant is going to ask you, "How is your meal?"
Hmm.
And you might say, "Meal's great." Now, do you honestly think they're going home and going, "I'm so glad they enjoyed their meal"? No, they don't care. They don't care at all. They're not going to remember you. They've
Yeah,
seen so many people at tables and they've said, "I'm so glad you've enjoyed your meal." But they don't. They don't care. And that's okay. We expect that from them. But can you imagine if we didn't? What that interaction would be like if you went to a restaurant, and you got your food and it was just kind of put on your table and they walked away. And you're like, "Gee, thanks." You know, I
exactly.
mean, you know,
I've been to a few like that, but yeah,
right, right. You expect something different, but I bet you don't harbor any ill will.
right,
Maybe I mean, maybe you go, "I'm not going to that restaurant again." You might do that, but you're not like 10 years later going, "Oh, that server."
exactly.
You know, so with Sheila, 10 years later, should Sheila, in the best case scenario, still be waking up angry and hurt and betrayed? Or for anybody who has survived and thrived from an abusive situation, don't we envision a point where this person is stronger, has, put this on the shelf? I wouldn't say behind them, but, and it's like, I don't define who I am by this event anymore. It is
Right.
part of who I am, all right? But I don't wake up angry and hurt anymore.
Hmm.
Oh, now how did we get there? Well, we got there through this process of mechila, of recognizing and grieving through this process of, I didn't get what I wanted. I didn't get what I deserved. I didn't get what I was supposed to have.
Okay.
And, and that's the work. And because I am no longer expecting this, because I have withdrawn feelings of ill will towards this person, I have forgiven. It's not the forgiveness that we think about in
Yeah.
terms of this reconciled relationship. We call that interpersonal forgiveness.
Hmm.
Rather, it's intrapersonal forgiveness. It
Hmm.
is the realization that I'm not going to live my life angry and hurt anymore. This person does not have power. These events do not have that kind of power over me.
Right.
And that's how I responded when I heard this concept of mechila. I thought to myself, how empowering. That forgiveness doesn't have to be this reconciled relationship with somebody who is not a good person still and has not changed, but rather we can just say, "You know what I wanted from you, I'm not going to get. You don't owe it to me anymore. And I'm not wishing bad things upon you. I'm moving on."
That's so good. It seems like I know you mentioned it in the book as well about a free pass, right? Like sometimes you may assume by forgiving someone that you're giving them a free pass or even that you're justifying what they did. And I think it's so empowering when you flip the lens there a little bit and consider that it's not so much about giving them a free pass, but it's giving yourself permission to move on, permission to be free, and not to harbor the anger and bitterness. But that is not even a magic wand, that it is a process. I love that you kept going back to that, is giving yourself grace and working through it, but determining what's the best path for you. And that you may have to keep going back to it. I thought that was interesting too, that you mentioned that piece of it's not a straightforward process. Like you may actually have to keep going back. And I had this, I feel like you wrote the book for me, and I'll just let me explain. I had a friend maybe 3 days ago, actually. She's perfectly fine in her mid 40s, but she sent my to a group message, but to me and a couple of, I think maybe six other women. We're really good friends. Uh, she has a daughter, and she said, I'm asking each of you to do this for my daughter. And she had a couple of things that she wanted us to do. She said, I'm fine. I'm not sick. I'm not dying or anything. But if by chance I die, I would like for each of you to invest in my daughter in this way. And so she started to lift up different gifts, assets that we have, and ask for us to help her daughter. And for me, she said one of the things that she mentioned was to teach her how to forgive. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm thinking like, why would, and I said, I started reflecting over my life, right? And
Mm.
the injustices that I've incurred, personally, professionally, all kinds of things. And I was like, I get it. I get it. I see why you said that. And I felt so much more grateful that I read this book. And I'm not getting paid to do this. I am telling you that I am so much of a believer in this process. And I think it could really help a lot of people to heal, to recover, and to truly walk in your power. And, that's what this whole podcast is about, is understanding how you can impact not just your world, but the world as a more powerful person. And this forgiveness is actually a weapon, right? It's a tool for you to walk in that power. And I wonder, I know I sent you a lot of questions that I was like, I might ask this, I might ask that. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was how you get to that place of determining if it's worthy of reconciliation or possible to reconcile. And I wonder if you can just share, because I think there are some of our listeners maybe questioning that piece, right? That something that I think you should know about this model. And I am advocating that you read the book so you can get it, really get it. But there's a forgiveness track and a reconciliation track packed into one process, if you will, right? Thinking process, emotional process. Forgiveness and reconciliation are paired, if you will, and you have to do the work. And so I just if you could talk a little bit about that, like how you get to that place of deciding if it's going to be interpersonal or intrapersonal.
Right. And so we have interpersonal forgiveness where I'm going to reconcile with the person. I call it renegotiating the relationship.
Yes.
All right. Because the relationship might change.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the same relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You might just need to renegotiate it. Or this concept of mechila. Yes, I make my non-Jewish readers learn a little bit of Hebrew, and they're stuck going mechila. No, not mechila. Mechila. You got to make that sound. And
Mahila.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. In Hebrew, there's actually a Hebrew letter called a chet, and it makes a sound. And
Wow. Okay.
yeah, and in English, we don't want to go. Bad things come out of our mouth when that happens. But yeah, that's just a letter in Hebrew, and so we have reconciliation as an outcome, as a possible outcome of forgiveness, but it is a separate and distinct outcome from mechila. So I guess my point is that and a big part of my point is that so many books focus on forgiveness leading to reconciliation, and I spend just as much amount of time trying to say, well, may not, forgiveness may not lead to reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so this first step is, what do you believe about forgiveness? You know, And are you willing to reconsider that definition? You
Hmm.
know, move away from the anecdotes. One of the studies that I remember reading and doing my research on forgiveness, and I didn't just write a book. I published articles in this process and worked with teams. Worked with you, and it was looking at um, how we teach about forgiveness. And there's a study where they interviewed clergy and congregants
Mm.
about reconciliation. And congregants overwhelmingly believed that reconciliation was an important part of forgiveness, but clergy did not.
Mm.
And it's
Wow.
like, right. And it's kind of like, oh my God, what are we teaching? you know, but it was this disconnect, that you don't have to reconcile with a bad person,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
yet, but forgiveness is divine. So how do we understand these concepts?
Yeah.
So exploring your beliefs about forgiveness was important, but also within this exploration, talking about the person or the event that caused harm. And when I say talking about it, who you're talking to. Sure, you could talk to a counselor. You could talk to a friend. You could talk to a mentor. You can talk to grandma. All right. It's somebody who you feel safe with, who you're going to listen. And why do I have to talk? Why do I have to tell my story? I actually bring up an example where I'm leading um, a group, and in this group, I've got this really angry teenager, and he is calling his mom the most horrible things and says how angry he gets. And I asked him a question. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no problem at all and 10 being this is unmanageable, how would you rate your anger? And he goes, oh, it's a 10. And then I have this other individual in the group who had been abused. And she talked about her abuse. She talked about her parents getting a divorce, and she went to go live with her father. And she knew her father smoked pot. She didn't know he did anything else. And her father ends up getting her into drugs and then sexually abusing her, raped her. And this goes on for a year. And she was just like, so I was raped by my dad, and I'm a crystal meth addict, and I just wanted to die, and that's why I'm here. And the kid who was previously talking about his mom says, okay, mine's not a 10, mine's a 4.
Right.
All of a sudden, he framed what was unmanageable.
Yeah.
And you're probably thinking that this person who was talking about her abuse from her dad is like, oh, wow, that's unmanageable. That's a 10. But then I always say, but wait, do you believe that this person can heal? Well, yes, I believe this person can heal. So even this person who was abused and is a drug addict
Yeah.
can heal.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe this person can heal. Then it's not a 10. Then it's not unmanageable. It's a
Hmm.
9.
Right.
So this is what talking does. Talking makes the unmentionable mentionable.
Mm.
And when you do that, you enter into this process of your pain just getting a little bit more manageable when
Yeah.
you make the unmentionable mentionable. So that's the first step, is talk to someone.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you're going to be asking a question. Eventually you'll ask, what do I need to do with this? Is there any benefit to trying to work with this person who's caused me so much pain, or not? And if there is, well, then you know what? You can eventually, you have to, what I say, this is a horrible example. I say, you got to confront Vader. I'm a Star Wars junkie. You got to go to the villain, and, you're either going to turn them to the light side, or maybe they're not Vader. Maybe they're Lord Voldemort, and they're just going to stay evil to the end.
Right.
But you know, but something's going to happen. You're either going to see that there is remorse and change in this process, and it won't be a single meeting. It's a process,
Hmm.
or there's not. Or you
Hmm.
might just say, no, under no
Yeah.
circumstances am I ever going to see this person again. I don't want to see this person again. Uh, Okay. And so you build toward, is reconciliation beneficial? Is there remorse and change? Can we renegotiate the relationship? Or is reconciliation not beneficial?
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you get there, and so you have two forgiveness paths,
Right.
one towards renegotiating that relationship, one towards going it alone, mechila, um, wiping away the debt, recognizing that what you wanted, you're not going to get, and not expecting that from that
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
And, you know, and we do this all the time. We often, you know, engage, you know, even a lighthearted thing. I give an example of two friends who treat each other to lunch, and one person takes their friend to lunch at a nice restaurant, and the other person says, you know, when it's their turn to treat for lunch, takes takes their friend to Taco Bell, you know, and eventually, nothing wrong with Yum Brands. We're not going to, you know, bash any brands.
Right.
It's just a different experience. And
Right.
you know, the one friend who's going to the little bit nicer restaurant might be saying, you know what I'm wanting from this, I'm not getting. This isn't equal. I'm not. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed.
Right.
But I kind of see what I'm getting from this, and I'm changing my expectations.
Hmm.
All right. And now I'm not disappointed anymore.
That's good. I mean, and that, I know you touched on this a little bit in the book too, but a lot of people are possibly processing unforgiveness with an entity or an event, right? Like, even if you can't identify who the actual perpetrator is, but this thing happened and it's real and I feel it and I'm harboring bitterness and anger and ill will. I think this process is also helpful, right? Because that collaborative exploration that you mentioned in the beginning, just giving voice to it, talking about it, explaining why you feel how you feel. Uh, and I love that you brought up the plight of African Americans in America, right? Like, and how do you get to a place of being okay with where things are? And nobody wants to be okay with that. Like, it is still a work in progress. Like, you have to constantly be in this forgiveness model in order to maintain your peace and your power. And so I think that the more that we understand that, the beauty of that and the complicated ways in which we have to move is I think something to treasure, because I never really had the terminology to explain what I would be feeling in certain situations, that it almost seemed like it was this forced reconciliation that was expected. But a lot of times that was not my desire. I don't want to reconcile with this person or this entity. I don't trust you. I don't think you're going to change. I think you are toxic, and I think that you are going to bring more harm to my life if I continue to engage with you. And how do I justify, from a spiritual perspective, of what forgiveness looks like, and thinking, if it's coupled with reconciliation, well, did I really forgive them? Am I really in a place? That I think is really powerful, because it gives that language that you need to be able to say, I've made a decision, and it's at an interpersonal level, I've forgiven. That doesn't mean that I'm now going to continue to uh, interact with you and engage,
Right. Right.
and that's okay. that that is healthy for me, is
Yeah.
healthy. So I love that, because I think a lot of people need that, and need that, the language, they need the understanding, they need permission to forgive internally, and understand that just because you're not able to reach an outcome that somebody else wants you to reach, or culturally you're expected to do it, if it's not healthy for you, then it's not healthy.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, one of the one of the elements that I mentioned this. I mentioned uh, the murder by Dylan Roof
Yes.
in South
Yes.
Carolina, and
Hmm.
I remember researching this because I remember reading about it. You could actually go on YouTube and watch the hearings. The videos are still there,
Wow.
and so I watched the videos, and I'm watching the survivors from those who were murdered speaking to the judge, but also to Dylan, who is in jail on video. And I'm seeing things like, and hearing things like, I forgive you because I have to forgive you. And may
Yeah.
God have mercy on your soul. And that's when I went into decisional forgiveness versus emotional forgiveness,
Mm. Hmm.
and thought about, some cultures believe forgiveness is a mandate,
Hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean that reconciliation is a mandate.
Exactly.
And that the decision to forgive might not correspond to the emotional readiness
Right.
to forgive. Just because you decide to forgive, and that's noble,
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you are emotionally ready. And so this is where we talked about earlier about doing the work. But
Yes.
um, you know, I think that okay, to cognitively go, I want to get to this point,
Yes.
you know, where what I'm saying, may God have mercy, I really mean, but
Right.
but I may not be there yet. Um, and whether it is a horrible event, an individual, a system
Hmm.
that sometimes we have to reconcile that what I expect from the system, I'm not going to get.
Yes.
You know,
Right.
and that doesn't mean I quit fighting for it.
So
Um,
true.
but um, again, when I reduce my expectations, oh yeah, that happened to you. That happens to me a lot.
Right.
Um,
And I want to read this quote. I think is really powerful, but it's on page 91, and it says change can be scary, and often people will act in ways to maintain the status quo rather than upset the balance and seek change. There is something scary about the unknown, and when change occurs, we do not know whether that change will be for the better or worse. And I think when we process a lot of the baggage that we carry, it is really tied and rooted to unforgiveness, to fear of the unknown. Uh, what happens if I actually take these things out of my sack, right, and evaluate them? And I think people, there's so much happening in people's lives on a personal level. That micro and macro impact is real. And I think that sometimes you don't even feel like you have time to do the work of how many, inflictions you've endured, pain points that you're trying to process, right? And I'm saying this because I think if you look at this model and you see that that first step is collaborative exploration, meaning you're doing this with someone. whether, and you made it very clear, it can, it can be a counselor, your therapist, it can be a good friend, a mentor, but you need to do it in collaboration with someone. And that's to assist you in seeing elements that you may not be able to see, to help you to explore. And you want this person to be a safe person, a trusted person, right?
Yes.
But I really want to encourage you all to think about that and who you can do that with. And if you can't think of anybody in your circle, to find a licensed therapist, a counselor to be able to process these things with, because I also thought it was pretty interesting as you're talking about the feedback that you've gotten from people using these tools, using the forgiveness reconciliation model, and then also the inventory. And one of the things I was like, oh man, I think I wrote it down. Let me see if I can get to the actual um, quote here. But you mentioned that there was feedback where people felt like they actually had a way to process things better. Here it is. It's on page 183. And this is from an individual who struggled with past abuse. And when they use the inventory that's associated with the model that you created, they said it mainly helped me realize where I am with all of the abuse. It isn't as overwhelming as it was 20 years ago. It is still there and will always probably be there. I can work on it.
Yeah.
Right. And I heard that, I read it and then I heard it, right? Like that there's hope, that there's power in knowing that you have a way of processing it, and that you have an understanding that it is a process, it's a journey. It's not, I just made a decision and now it's gone, right? And so you talk a lot about that trauma is real, and you can still feel it, in your body. The triggers, like when you're around, a person, the person that offended you, or the entity, or whatever, your body reacts, right? And I used to think, and I know that's why I say you wrote this book for me. I used to think that my reaction to the offender, seeing or being around or in the presence or even the mention of the name or scrolling and see the face. I mean, I would have this reaction and I was like, like goodness, I thought I was over that. Like I thought I had forgiven. I thought I had moved. And it doesn't. I mean, based on what you were sharing in the book, like that's natural, it's normal, right?
Right. Right.
Right. And so I finally am at peace with that, where I don't feel like I'm not shaming myself for not reaching some unreachable place. Like it's really ridiculous if you think about it, that you would think that you would have no reaction when you've had an interaction, because that actually, I love that. I think you mentioned this. Yeah, you did, around the benefits of having those kind of triggers, right? It's a way of keeping us safe. It's a reminder that,
Right.
hey, something bad happened here. And it keeps your mind, your body, your spirit in a place where you can hopefully process uh, what you do in that moment, or what you do next, or how you move from that place in a healthy way. Because now you have these tools, you have this realization. This is normal. How I feel is normal. And sometimes, if it's not, and I know you mentioned that too, it may be an indicator that you need to do some additional work, that you may
Right.
need to reach out to a professional counselor, get some help, and work out, why did I have this exaggerated response, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about like what some indicators would be, where people could process the difference
Yeah.
between what's normal and abnormal?
Well, so I go into in the book, for anybody who's like, knows just a little bit about psychology or psychiatry or counseling just to be dangerous, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard of Sigmund Freud,
Right.
and yeah, I've heard of Freud. And but probably one of the things that you've heard of, if you've ever taken a Psych 101 class, is you've heard of defense mechanisms. Or you might have even said to a friend, or a friend has said to you at some point, don't be defensive,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Um, and, and there's like a ton of different defense mechanisms, sometimes we repress, we don't want to think about or remember. Sometimes we've seen regression, we've seen, our 17-year-old acting like a 12-year-old. Like, why are you doing that? And we call that
Right.
regression. Yeah. But a big one for adults is projection.
Mm.
How many of us have ever gotten mad at our significant other because we're mad at somebody else,
Right. Right.
or because we're maybe even upset with ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And so we project,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a big one. Um, or as you mentioned, that fear response. So one of the things that I always mention is that be careful with your defense mechanisms. Be careful, if you're defensive, a good question to ask yourself is what's going on that I'm being defensive?
Right.
Because you know I'm defensive when I feel invaded. You know,
Right.
I'm defensive when I'm being attacked. Um, when I am defensive, I am protecting myself. Okay. And so now there are harmful ways of protecting oneself. I'm
Yes.
feeling bad, so I'm going to go drink.
Right.
Okay. That's bad. I'm feeling bad right now. I'm going to go for a run. Okay. So, you know, nothing wrong with feeling bad.
Right.
The other thing I mentioned is that there's certain emotions that concern us and certain emotions that we tend to dismiss. One emotion that concerns us is anger. You know, when people get, when we act out in anger, or when people are angry, that's strong. We tend to dismiss when somebody is sad because that's less of an affront to us. Oh, I hate to see that you're sad. But let me throw this one at you. Anger maybe is a secondary emotion. And that a question I always ask somebody when I see that they're angry is, what are you afraid of? And here's what I mean by that. If you can imagine, you know, I, I I don't hunt. I've never hunted in my. No, that's not true. I have hunted once in my life, I think with squirrels or something. But you know, and when you're squirrel hunting, it's the stupidest thing. You have these dogs, and the dogs will tree a squirrel. And there's probably people listening to this podcast go, "Yeah, that's right, Rick. A dog trees a squirrel. Of course, everybody knows that." I,
Right.
I I was a city boy. Grew up in a nice Jewish home. We didn't have dogs that treat squirrels. Okay, so
Right.
all right, so yeah, excuse my ignorance if I'm just like throwing something out here. So anyway, all right. So dog spots a squirrel. What does the squirrel do? Squirrel runs up a tree. All right, and then the dog barks at the squirrel. Now, what happens if there's not a tree nearby? What happens if the squirrel gets cornered? Squirrel's going to turn around and get kind of gnarly at the dog.
Mhm.
We call this fight or flight. So what was happening? The squirrel ran from the dog. Why? In fear.
Mm.
Then the squirrel got cornered, turned around and got gnarly.
Yeah.
Anger. Anger because of why? Because of fear. And so,
Right.
okay, Rick, are we really like squirrels? Maybe. Um, maybe, if you are angry at your abuser, that's a severe example, but you're angry at your abuser. What are you afraid of? You're afraid of getting hurt again. If there's been infidelity in your marriage, and you're angry about it, what are you angry about? You know, you fear continuing to be in a dishonest relationship. You fear it. If you are angry that a teacher isn't being fair to your child, all right, what are you afraid of? that my kid's not going to get a fair shake. That's a fear. All right. And so we respond to our fears very
Mm.
often with anger,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so this becomes very important to think about in terms of forgiveness.
Right.
That I'm not going to just magically make my anger go away. I'm going to recognize what I'm afraid of, and I'm going to protect myself
Mm-hmm.
in a way that no longer puts me in a dangerous situation.
That's so good. And it really, I think helps to highlight that point about doing the work, because it takes work to process that, to figure out what is it beneath the anger. What am I really afraid of? What's the fear here? I wanted to kind of end with the fact that forgiveness is a journey. And I know you mentioned that quite a bit throughout the book, and even have a section titled Understanding Your Journey, right? To
Right.
personalize the concepts that you're teaching. And which is why it's a phenomenal read. I mean, he really does engage you. You get these nuggets, and then it's like, okay, now apply it to your life. And I wonder if you can share what you would recommend in terms of preparing people for this forgiveness journey. Like, what do you need to have in your knapsack, if you will, for this journey?
Well, you've mentioned a really important piece of it, and that is a, a person in your life, someone that you can be honest with and talk to.
Yeah,
And, you know, another part of my work has been on relationships, and particularly the
yeah,
counseling relationship. But,
right.
we heal through our relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know and so I think that's such an important piece of it. And then the other and as you're thinking about your journey, what is the role of reconciliation? Is this something that's worth pursuing, and has the person that I need to reconcile with shown growth,
Yeah.
remorse and change? Or do I need to be honest about the fact that this isn't going to happen the way I would like it to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and my journey is going to be different. And um, you know, in either scenario, whether you reconcile with an offender or whether you work toward a more intra-personal process with mechila, um, the the end result is relinquishing feelings of ill will
Mm-hmm.
toward the person or event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what forgiveness is. You
Right.
know, you know, it's not about reconciliation. It's about relinquishing feelings of ill will
Mm-hmm.
toward uh, toward the person or events that have caused me harm.
Mm-hmm. That's so
And
good.
yeah,
And I want to say this too, because I don't know if my experience is unique or if this is normal. So I'll just say it, and if it hits, then it hits, and if it doesn't, you're like, Kish, you're weird. But this is what I experience, because I tend to expect a lot out of people. I am constantly in a place where I have uh, a tendency to experience being offended, right?
mm,
Or sensing that somebody disappointed me or let me down, because I expect you to behave in this way that I don't even know if it's possible, right? But that's just my mentality, right? Like, I want everybody to be great. And if
yeah,
you're not great, then now I feel away, right? And if you're anything like me, you really want to learn how to do this and do it well, so that you can be in a very healing place or healed place. It's a process, right? We don't reach this destination. It's just you're walking that out daily. But my point is, if you're more prone to being disappointed by people's actions or having high expectations that don't get met by other people or even yourself, right? Because you don't just, you're not, you're not like me if you don't have those same high expectations or
Right.
higher for yourself, right? So you have to be willing to do the work of constantly forgiving yourself for not meeting your own expectations and for forgiving other people for not meeting your expectations for them, right?
Yeah.
Because I know we talk about, when we think about this, we're usually thinking about it in the context of major hurt and harm. But sometimes it's the minor things, it's the minutia of life that can also become bigger, right? When we don't work it out. And so get this language, learn these tools, work through this process. And what I want to say about this book in closing, read it from cover to cover, really. There's the inventory in here. That's a tool to help you process where you are on your journey toward forgiveness and or reconciliation. And I think you will really be blessed by this. So I'm just putting it out there, telling you to get it. And I wanted to close with a quote and then ask you if you can share how people can access these tools. So the quote is on page 188, and you said, uh, I believe, yeah, this was your personal experience about getting hit while you were riding your bike.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
got to read it. I'm not going to go into it, but this is what you say. The bicycle accident was 13 years ago, but it is still with me. Even though I have forgiven, I still revisit the trauma, even though I have forgiven. There is no tidy bow on the story, but I am well and I am not angry. Oh, okay. The reason why I wanted to end on that note is because I love a good tidy bow, right? Like that's also something that I like.
Yeah.
And this is what forgiveness, this journey, it is not that.
Yeah.
You don't get tidy bows with this stuff, okay? But to be able to admit that you're not angry and that you're well, that is the gift. That is the bow. That's the pretty packaging. That's everything, is being well. And so if you haven't heard anything else from us today, we hope that you've picked up on the fact that our desire is for you to be well, for you to walk in peace, and for you not to be encumbered by whatever preconceived notions you may have about how you should handle a situation when you've been harmed. Okay, so these are tools for you. I hope that you tune in some kind of way to access and get what you need. And Dr. B, can you tell us how people can get this tool
Yeah.
and how they can interact with you?
Yeah. So the book is available on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to get it. Um, it's not an expensive book. It's like $20 or something like that. So, but it's available on Amazon. The publisher is Oxford University Press, so you can buy it directly from the publisher. There's a local bookstore that's kind of famous here in Oxford, Mississippi, called Square Books, and they carry the book as well. So
Nice.
so that's a possibility as well. As if you want to support your local bookstore, Square Books. If you want to go with Amazon, that's probably the easiest. Or you can get it directly from the publisher, Oxford University Press. Um, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Awesome. And one more treat, guys. If you're watching, you'll see this on page 176. I'm in the book where you see the reference Cumi. That's me. And I'm so excited to be able to just promote this, not just because I'm a fan of yours, but because I'm a fan of your work. And I think this truly is a way to really help people walk in their healing and power. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been a joy and an honor, and I hope you listeners were blessed. And we'll catch you next time. In the meantime, be bold, be courageous, be unpimped.